The HOA tore down Lydia Franklin's beloved porch swing, without warning, without consent. Behind it stood Greg Simmons, a power-hungry HOA president who thought no one would dare fight back. But Lydia had the law and a determined attorney on her side, ready to expose the board's deeper violations. Just listen to how this neighborhood battle took a stunning turn, and why justice, in the end, prevailed. Lydia Franklin had spent her life teaching second graders how to read, count, and dream big. When she finally retired after 35 years in the classroom, her one wish was simple: a peaceful home of her own, with a wide front porch where she could sip sweet tea and listen to the birds. She found that dream in Willow Ridge, a neat little HOA community nestled beneath tall pines in northern Georgia. Her house was a quaint craftsman, its porch wrapped in white trim, shaded by an old oak tree. The previous owner had left behind a beautiful white oak porch swing, solid and smooth, hung from sturdy beams with iron chains. Lydia fell in love with it instantly. Most mornings she'd sit there with a book and a glass of tea. In the evenings, neighbors would wave as they passed by, and sometimes she'd watch the sun go down, with a soft breeze on her face. The swing wasn't just a decoration. It was home. Then came the letter. One muggy June morning, Lydia opened her mailbox and found an official-looking envelope stamped HOA Compliance Division. Curious, she tore it open, and her stomach dropped. Unauthorized structure attached to front porch. Immediate removal required. $500 daily fine for non-compliance. She blinked, rereading the words. Unauthorized structure? What on earth were they talking about? Puzzled, Lydia picked up the phone and dialed the number printed on the letter. After 3 tries, she reached Greg Simmons, president of the Willow Ridge HOA. Greg had a certain reputation in the neighborhood. A retired insurance adjuster, he treated HOA rules like the fine print on an old contract. Several elderly neighbors had whispered stories about sudden fines and odd new rules. Lydia had tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, until now. "Mr. Simmons," she said carefully, "I received a violation notice this morning. It says something about an unauthorized structure. Could you clarify?" His voice came through flat and cold. "It's the swing on your porch." "My porch swing?" Lydia said, baffled. "It was there when I bought the house. It's bolted to the support beams, part of the porch design." Greg gave a small, dismissive cough. "Doesn't matter. Last week the board voted. No swings visible from the street. Structural uniformity." "But it's not a new addition," Lydia said. "It's safe, it's beautiful, and it's part of the charm of this community." "The decision stands," Greg replied sharply. "You'll need to remove it immediately. Otherwise, fines will apply." Lydia hung up, her hands trembling. It didn't make sense. Her swing wasn't hurting anyone. It wasn't breaking any safety code, and it had been part of the home's character for years. Still, she refused to take it down. 2 days later, she left to run a few errands. When she returned, arms full of groceries, her heart stopped. The swing was gone. The bolts had been crudely sheared off. The polished wood was scraped and leaning against the side of her porch. In its place, someone had hung a little sign, HOA contractor, work completed. Lydia stood frozen on her porch. No notice, no phone call, no chance to appeal. They had trespassed onto her property and taken what was not theirs. Her throat tightened. That swing had been a gift from her late husband, his final project before he passed. Now it had been treated like a piece of garbage. And as she looked across the street, the bitterest sight of all, the HOA's own community playground was packed with children swinging on bright red swing sets, their laughter echoing through the air. Her swing was gone, but theirs remained in full view. At that moment, standing on her scraped porch, Lydia felt a quiet fury take root. Something inside her shifted. They had no idea who they were messing with. The very next morning, Lydia drove to the county sheriff's office and filed a police report. Trespassing, property damage, theft. The deputy who took her statement, an older man named Deputy Parker, listened carefully. When Lydia finished, he leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "I'll file this, ma'am," he said, "but these HOA folks, they're slippery. They usually bury this kind of thing in board votes and homeowner agreements. If they passed a motion and hired a contractor, might be hard to pin them." "I never gave consent," Lydia said, her voice tight. "I hear you." The deputy gave her a sympathetic look. "But be prepared. They like to dance in the gray areas." Word spread fast around Willow Ridge. A few neighbors came by quietly to offer support, but also to warn her. "Careful, Lydia," whispered Marge from 3 doors down. "Greg fined Carl Baxter $600 last month. Said his birdhouses were visual clutter. Poor man, took down every one of them." Lydia thanked them but made no promises. She wasn't the type to back down from bullies. 2 days later, while she was watering her flowers, a neighbor approached, someone she didn't know well. Chris Mendez, a young father with a toddler and a second child on the way. He worked as a civil engineer for the county. "Miss Franklin," he said quietly, glancing around, "I saw what happened with your swing. Just so you know, what they did may not be legal." Lydia frowned. "How so?" "I was at the board meeting where they claimed they passed that rule," Chris explained. "Proper notification wasn't given. It was supposed to be posted publicly and emailed to homeowners 2 weeks in advance. They rushed it through, voted in a private session. That makes the vote invalid. If they acted on that, they crossed a line." Lydia's heart pounded. "You're certain?" Chris nodded. "I've seen it before. HOA boards sometimes bluff. They count on folks being too scared or too tired to push back." That night, Lydia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The porch swing wasn't just wood and chains. It was his swing, her late husband Ben's last project. They had sanded it together, stained it carefully by hand. On warm evenings, they'd sit side by side and watch the stars rise over the pines. It was where she had said her final goodbye. And now, some petty man and his power-hungry board had stolen that memory, without warning, without care. Her sadness gave way to a deeper, colder anger. And that anger only grew when she stumbled across a line buried in last year's HOA budget report. $28,000 playground upgrade project. Curious, Lydia started digging. Public records showed the HOA had skipped the required county inspection on the new playground equipment. Worse, Chris confirmed it. The matting under those swings isn't ADA compliant. The support beams aren't treated wood. It's not safe. The hypocrisy burned. Greg had no problem cutting corners on a public playground used by dozens of neighborhood children. But he'd sent a crew to rip down a harmless porch swing without even knocking on her door. Lydia's jaw set. The time for grieving was over. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. Lydia knew she couldn't take on the HOA alone, not with Greg Simmons steering the board like his personal fiefdom. So she called her niece, Rachel Givens, a sharp young attorney who specialized in municipal codes and land use law. Rachel had spent her career helping small towns hold developers and government bodies accountable. When Lydia explained what had happened, Rachel didn't hesitate. "I'll be there tomorrow, Aunt Lydia. Bring every document you have." By the next afternoon, Lydia's dining table was covered in files, HOA newsletters, budget reports, county ordinances, and a copy of the dubious violation notice. They combed through it all late into the evening. Halfway through the stack, Rachel's brow furrowed. She pointed to the playground budget line and cross-referenced it with the county's public playground safety standards. "They never filed the final inspection form," Rachel said. "The equipment specs don't match county requirements, and they used untreated wood for structural supports. That's a violation of basic public safety codes?" She flipped another page and smiled grimly. "And that so-called vote about your porch swing? It was illegal. They skipped the required notification period and never posted minutes. This board is playing fast and loose with the rules." Lydia's anger crystallized into resolve. The next morning, under Rachel's guidance, Lydia filed a formal complaint with the County Code Enforcement Office. Along with it, they submitted a detailed packet, photographs of the playground, minutes from board meetings, or lack thereof, and affidavits from neighbors confirming that the HOA had not followed proper procedures. Greg Simmons caught wind of it within days. That Thursday evening, Lydia's phone rang. She stared at the caller ID for a moment, then picked up. Greg's tone was sugar-coated, but strained. Lydia, let's be reasonable here. We don't need to make this a bigger issue than it is. Maybe we can, forget about the swing. Let bygones be bygones. Lydia's voice was calm, steady. You trespassed. You destroyed property. You broke the law. I'm done being intimidated, Greg. A pause. I'll see you in court. For once, Greg had no reply. 2 weeks later, a white county inspection van pulled into Willow Ridge, parking in front of the community playground. Residents peered through their windows as 2 inspectors in safety vests walked the site, measuring beams, testing swing chains, checking fall protection. Then came the final step. One inspector pulled out a thick envelope from the van and handed it to Greg, who had been summoned on site. Court order, immediate closure, unsafe equipment, and improper installation. Yellow safety tape soon wrapped the entire playground fence, and on the front gate an unmistakable bright orange notice appeared. Court-ordered closure. Unsafe structure. Do not enter. The next morning, the entire neighborhood woke to the sight. Parents arriving with strollers and children stopped in confusion. Word spread like wildfire. Greg had gambled on no one standing up to him. Now, thanks to Lydia's determination, his corner cutting had been exposed for all to see. And Lydia? She stood on her porch, eyes clear, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold from where her swing had once hung. The fight wasn't over yet, but now she was winning. Greg Simmons was livid. Word of the court-ordered playground closure had spread through Willow Ridge like wildfire. Parents were outraged. Children asked why they couldn't play on their favorite swings. And for once, even Greg's usual allies on the board were turning cold. At the next HOA meeting, held in the community clubhouse, every seat was full. Many residents stood along the walls. Faces were tense, voices sharp. They weren't here for a neighborhood potluck recipes or landscaping tips. They wanted answers. Greg opened the meeting with a forced smile and a few boilerplate announcements. But it didn't take long for the first voice to cut through. "What about the playground, Greg?" a young mother called out. "Our kids can't even use it now. You didn't tell us about safety violations." Another voice. "You can't just blame Lydia. We've seen this pattern before." Greg's mask cracked. His voice rose. "She brought this on us," he shouted, pointing towards Lydia. "All over a swing." A murmur ran through the room. For a moment it seemed the old tactics might work, that Greg could shift the focus away. But the tide had turned. Several residents stood up in support of Lydia. One older man spoke first. "Greg, she followed the law. You didn't. And you've cost this neighborhood trust, time, and now our children's safety." Then Lydia rose. She stood tall and steady. The room quieted. "You entered my property without notice," she said evenly, her voice carrying through the clubhouse. "You destroyed something precious to me, something that belonged to my late husband and me. You broke your own rules to do it." She looked around the room. "I didn't seek conflict. I sought the truth. And when the truth came out, you blamed me for your decisions." Rachel, Lydia's niece, stepped forward next. Calmly, she placed a binder of documents on the table. Clear evidence of HOA procedural violations, unapproved votes, and the playground's non-compliance with county safety codes. The board members flipped through it. One by one, several looked visibly shaken. "I didn't sign off on that playground without inspection," one muttered. Another, an older woman, stood abruptly. "I'm resigning," she said, voice trembling. "I won't be part of this anymore." In the end, 3 board members resigned on the spot. Greg tried to regain control, but the room had turned against him. A motion was called for new elections. The county, meanwhile, imposed steep fines on the HOA for code violations, penalties that would have to be paid before the playground could reopen. To fund it, the new interim board voted to cancel several of Greg's expensive, cosmetic landscaping projects, redirecting those funds to proper playground repairs. And Lydia? With the board under new leadership and public sentiment firmly in her corner, her porch swing was professionally reinstalled. this time with reinforced beams and an ironclad written agreement. No further interference from the HOA regarding Lydia's porch. At the next community gathering, the new board chair issued a formal public apology to Lydia on behalf of the HOA. Weeks later, Lydia sat once again on her reclaimed swing, sweet tea in hand, the late afternoon sun filtering through the oaks. Across the street, the sound of children laughing filled the air as the newly rebuilt, fully inspected playground reopened. She smiled softly. One determined voice had made a difference, and now peace had returned to Willow Ridge.